The second dimension is individualism versus collectivism. This dimension refers to the extent to which people in a society see themselves as individuals or as part of a group. Countries with high individualism scores have a strong focus on individual achievement and responsibility. Countries with high collectivism scores have a strong focus on group harmony and cooperation.
Looking like a baddie, I show up and make them stop. Wanna know my name so badly, cause I run this whole block. Flip my hair, move my head, show the world I'm royalty. When I walk by, they be taking bows, cause they know I'm the queen, yeah.
How do you grow any company across borders? How did we do it in the past? We copy-pasted the website to a new domain, translated all the content, done. But as we learned along the way, no website fits all, and particularly when entering a new country. Why weren't we able to have the same high conversion rate in a new country? My name is Sander Volbeda. I'm a freelance conversion specialist from the Netherlands, proud dad of 2 boys, the host of the podcast Golden Nuggets for Experimentation, and founder of CRO tool. In my spare time I like to work out and work on side projects. Today I would like to start a conversation about cross-border experimentation, aka international experimentation. My CRO journey I started at a startup, which quickly grew and moved to multiple countries across the globe. They are a facilitator platform for parkings near airports. They started to grow across Europe and the rest of the world, and it was up to me to start skyrocketing the conversions for each country. However, after running the first couple of experiments in multiple countries, I started to notice different results for each experiment in each country. My first thought, what the heck? Back then I had little experience with CRO, and I always assumed the results would be the same for every country. Well, I know better now. I started to do some research. That's when I came across the Hofstede model. The Hofstede model is a framework for understanding cultural differences across countries. It was developed by the Dutch social psychologist Geert Hofstede in the 1970s, and it's based on a survey of IBM employees in over 70 countries. Sounds interesting, right? The model identifies 6 dimensions of culture: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. Each dimension is scored on a scale of 0 to 100, and the scores for each country can be compared to see how they differ. Let's dive into each dimension to get a better understanding of what they mean. The first is power distance. This dimension refers to the extent to which people in a society accept that power is distributed unequally. Countries with high power distance scores have a hierarchical society, where people expect those in power to make decisions, and those with less power to follow them. Countries with low power distance scores have a more egalitarian society, where people expect to have a say in decision making regardless of their position. The second dimension is individualism versus collectivism. This dimension refers to the extent to which people in a society see themselves as individuals or as part of a group. Countries with high individualism scores have a strong focus on individual achievement and responsibility. Countries with high collectivism scores have a strong focus on group harmony and cooperation.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
The third dimension is masculinity versus femininity. This dimension refers to the extent to which a society values traditionally masculine or feminine traits. Countries with high masculinity scores value assertiveness, achievement, and material success. Countries with high femininity scores value cooperation, caring, and quality of life. The fourth dimension is uncertainty avoidance. This dimension refers to the extent to which people in a society feel comfortable with uncertainty. Countries with a high uncertainty avoidance score have a low tolerance for ambiguity and prefer clear rules and procedures. Countries with low uncertainty avoidance scores are more comfortable with change. The fifth dimension is long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. This dimension refers to the extent to which a society values the future or the present. Countries with high long-term orientation scores have a focus on future rewards and planning for the long term. Countries with high short-term orientation scores have a focus on immediate gratification and the past. And the sixth, also the last, is indulgence versus restraint. This dimension refers to the extent to which a society allows for gratification of basic and natural human desires. Countries with high indulgence scores have a relaxed attitude towards pleasure and have a strong focus on enjoying life. Countries with high restraint scores have a more restrictive attitude towards pleasure and have a strong focus on self-discipline. So, before we do anything and start deploying a website in a new country, it's smart to do some research. I've listed some questions for you. You can just scan the QR code to download them. No worries to type/write them all out. I will go over them now. The first questions are related to power distance. How much do people in this culture value hierarchy and respect for authority? How do people in this culture react to people who challenge authority? How do people in this culture view the role of the leader? And keep in mind, you can use these questions to generate some test ideas as well. If there is a high respect for authority, it might be smart to put authority figures on your website on certain places to convince people. The second dimension, individualism versus collectivism. How much do people in this culture value independence and personal achievement? How much do people in this culture value group harmony and cooperation? How do people in this culture view the role of the family? Here, social proof is one of the attributes that can help generate more revenue for the company. Then we have the third dimension, masculinity versus femininity. How much do people in this culture value assertiveness and competition? How much do people in this culture value cooperation and caring for others? How do people in this culture feel the role of men and women? Uncertainty avoidance. How much do people in this culture feel comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty? How much do people in this culture need clear and structured information? How do people in this culture view change? Long-term versus short-term orientation. How much do people in this culture value tradition and saving for the future? How much do people in this culture value change and innovation? How do people in this culture view the role of work? And this is especially important to generate USPs for selling expensive products, for example. They are focused on long term, have high quality, and the short term is more for the pricing. A cheap price, fast delivery. So that's how you can identify some new test ideas for certain cultures/countries. And then we have the last dimension, indulgence versus restraint. How much do people in this culture value pleasure and self-expression? How much do people in this culture value self-discipline and control? How do people in this culture feel the role of leisure? Probably after this list you already have like 10 to 20 new test ideas ready to put on your website. So the culture part is very important to include in your hypothesis when you're experimenting in multiple countries. Keep in mind, we're running the same experiment in multiple countries in this case. When you have some great test ideas and you're going to write your hypothesis, it can already be smart to include some of the information you got from the Hofstede model. For example, for a Dutch website it's very important to have a clear and concise About Us page. This page should give visitors a good understanding of your company and its values. It should also highlight the fact that your company is open to feedback and that visitors are encouraged to have a say in the decision-making process. Whereas the Philippines have a high power distance, it might work better to show support from high authority figures on the About Us page, rather than showcasing they are open for feedback. Make sure to include this kind of information, as the same goes for psychology. The whole process is about learning, and each country and their culture is different. You'll need to collect this information. Let's dive into some more examples which you can use for your hypothesis. Let's start with power distance. In cultures with high power distance, people expect a clear hierarchy and respect for authority. Websites for these cultures should use clear titles and images to indicate hierarchy, and they should avoid informal language. The second dimension, individualism versus collectivism. In individualistic cultures, people value independence and personal achievement. Websites for these cultures should focus on individual user, and they should use personal pronouns such as you and your. Masculinity versus femininity. The masculine cultures, people value assertiveness and competition. Websites for these cultures should have a strong visual language and showcase that they are the best. Uncertainty avoidance. In cultures with high uncertainty avoidance, people prefer clear and structured information. Websites for these cultures should use clear and concise language, and they should avoid ambiguity. Long-term versus short-term orientation. In cultures with long-term orientation, people value tradition and saving for the future. Websites for these cultures should focus on products and services that have long-term benefits, and they should use language that emphasizes the future. Indulgence versus restraint. In cultures with high indulgence, people value pleasure and self-expression. Websites for these cultures should use bright colors and images, and they should focus on products and services that appeal to the senses. Even if you didn't include the Hofstede model in your hypothesis, you can include it during your evaluation. It might explain certain behaviors and why experiment results are what they are for each country. Including these elements in your hypothesis will automatically add them to your list of things to evaluate after an experiment is finished. If you didn't include it in your hypothesis, don't worry, but I would add it as an additional research/learning for each experiment. Now we've discussed all the different dimensions and some examples with them. But you are likely already wondering, Sander, does this mean you need a different version of the website for each country? Well, yeah, maybe that's the case. That would always be the question, since it will put more stress on the development resources. However, this could be a great way to quickly grow across borders and start to get international authority. In the ideal situation, you are having one website for the whole market. But in order to grow and gain culture fit, you might need to have a different version of a website. Experiment with it, what works best for your company. It's easy to adjust copy, maybe also the images, but certain elements might be more of a hassle. To summarize, in this talk we discuss how to grow any company across borders using the Hofstede model. The Hofstede model is a framework for understanding cultural differences across countries, and it can be a valuable tool for CRO who are looking to improve their results in different markets. We started by discussing the sixth dimension of the Hofstede model: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. We then talked about how these dimensions can affect the way people interact with the websites. And we provided some examples of how to use the Hofstede model to improve your website's conversion rate in different countries. Finally, we talked about the Hofstede model can be used to write hypotheses and evaluate experiments. We argued that it's important to consider cultural factors when writing hypotheses. And we showed how the Hofstede model can be used to explain certain behaviors and why experiment results are what they are for each country. I hope this talk has given you a better understanding of how to use the Hofstede model to improve your cross-border experimentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or check my website sandervolbeda.com. You can also scan the QR code. Thanks for listening.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing.